If Fury Road wasn't enough to convince you that Charlize Theron is a bona fide hardcore action star, case closed. Atomic Blonde. I caught this past weekend, actually at a drive-in, and it's been a while since I've been at one. It was a pretty good time. So this is the latest movie from one of the two directors of the first John Wick. And obviously, it's gonna beg a fair amount of comparisons to that movie. Now, I actually think I might be able to stay spoiler-free on this one for the most part, just because the plot isn't really the point. Although the movie thinks it is. I'll come back to that. But let's start with what's good. Pretty much all the performances. Charlize Theron sells the heck out of this character, especially in the action scenes. James McAvoy really does that wonderful line of being fun to watch, but also really sleazy. You've got Toby Jones and John Goodman as sort of an MI6 and a CIA guy, respectively, and they're both just great actors to have around. They always are. Sofia Boutella's on hand as a French operative, and she's real cool. So the setting on this thing, this is a Cold War era spy movie set like right up to when the Berlin Wall is about to fall, and set in Berlin. So here's the thing. To make the comparison to John Wick, because like I said, you kind of can't avoid that. John Wick, which is an awesome movie, understood that the plot, such as it was the excuse to get from action scene to action scene. And it knew, as a result, to make not a stupid plot, but a simple plot. This doesn't do that. Now, there are action scenes in it, and they are great, but there's only about 4 of them. And unlike John Wick, which understood the story wasn't the reason anyone was there, Atomic Blonde thinks it has a story worth telling. And while it's not a bad story, if you've seen any Cold War era spy movies, you kind of already know what you're in for. Something that is simultaneously almost inscrutable, but completely predictable. What I mean by that is you're gonna have a very hard time figuring out who's on what side and working for who and doing what, yet at the same time be able to plot out the beats of the whole thing almost exactly. So whereas the movie is constructed as though the action scenes are the icing on an already delectable story, what happens instead is the action scenes become the reason to see the movie somewhat in spite of the story. Now, I do want to be clear though, the action scenes, even though they are not as consistent in terms of how often they're presented as they were in John Wick, are the reason to see this movie. There is one fight in particular, which is this knockdown, drag-out fight that happens in a stairwell, spills over into an apartment. It goes on, and it alone is worth the price of admission. This scene is epic, and it is awesome, and it is the first movie that I have caught since They Live that shows the exhaustion that is involved in a long, very physical hand-to-hand fight. And it just sells that well. I would argue even better than They Live did. But it's just something you don't see that often. But this movie, the hits hurt. You feel the exhaustion that these characters are feeling, but it doesn't get old, it doesn't get bored. You're not left going, oh God, is this fight still going on? You're instead left going, oh my God, how are they even still moving? And they barely are. Now, even though the fight scenes are the reason to be here, the characters are fun. It's just the story they're being asked to move in, like I said, is convoluted when it absolutely didn't need to be. The way that this thing, what the strengths of this thing are, really needed something with a stripped down story, and this does not have that at all. Now, I've talked to someone who's read the original comic book that this is based off of, and said that the story presented on screen is representative of what the comic book is. So it may have been a case of they just didn't know when to adjust more from the source material. I can't speak to that personally. But I will say, if you like hard-hitting action, and if you like Charlize Theron, you really kind of can't go wrong. And like I said, even though too much time is spent on a story that isn't as good as the movie thinks it is, the action scenes are worth seeing it at least once. That one turned out kind of short. I think my thoughts are just, they're pretty succinct on it. So, have you seen it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. And until next time, this council is adjourned.